Techlandia is recorded at the Central Office on the East Side in Portland. Central Office is a one stop for all your office or meeting needs. Check them out at centraloffice.com. Welcome to Techlandia, a podcast about and for the technology industry, a place to learn, connect, and engage with leaders and thinkers involved in the technology industry. You can check us out at techoregon.org, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Welcome to the latest episode of Techlandia, Tao's regular podcast series. I'm Skip Newberry, President and CEO of Tao. And with us, we're pleased to have as our guest, John Vincenzo with Exterro. John, thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me, Skip. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Well, as most people know, I like to start these off by asking each of our guests to share a little bit about their career journey, and would love for you to spend a little bit of time here sharing, yours. And how did you end up at Exterro?
Thanks. Yeah, I would say I'm lucky to be at Exterro. If I go back in time and think about where I came from, I actually started out wanting to study journalism, particularly sports journalism. And so you never would expect me to be in high tech, and certainly not spending the last 35 plus years in marketing technology. But I was a journalism major, wanting to be the big thing in sports broadcasting, and that was until I figured out what that would entail. And I found myself in college after my internship posting my video that I liked it as a hobby. I wasn't sure I wanted to do it as a career anymore. So I started kind of piecing together things that I had done in terms of organizing events and activities, and found public relations as a stepping off point. And that's where I got my start. I started in a PR agency doing consumer PR, and then quickly got into high tech PR strictly by accident. I really did. I barely know who Bill Gates was at the time, and I just kind of kept moving along and figured out high tech was where it was. This is in the early '90s, and I've been in high tech ever since. So I've been working with technology companies from networking. I was with Verizon, large phone company you guys may have heard of, doing PR, corporate communications, and graduated into companies like 3Com, where I ran global marketing for 3Com. I did an early stage startup, pre-product launch. I've done technology companies working in marketing as CMO, Chief Marketing Officer. We're turning a company around, a company called Silver Peak, which ultimately was acquired by HPE. And then most recently found Exterro. So I'm excited to be at Exterro as we look to grow the company.
Awesome. Well, I love the sort of serendipitous or sort of accidental careers, and you've stuck with it all this time. So clearly there's something interesting there that's kept you moving in the marketing and technology space. And now what I'd like to do is maybe shift gears a little bit. And some of us in the tech sector locally are pretty familiar with Exterro, but we have a wide variety of different types of listeners to this particular podcast series. So I would love if you could spend a little bit of time just painting the picture for folks. Tell us about Exterro, and what are you excited about that you all are kind of working on or moving toward right now?
Yeah, great. No, let me start with kind of just a real quick statement of what we do, and then we can get into, because I think it's actually it's nice to go back in time a little bit as well, and kind of how we got here. At the end of the day, Exterro is a software company, a software as a service company, or SaaS, and we enable organizations, large enterprises in particular, but also legal departments, law enforcement. We help them reduce their data footprint and their data risk by offering a software platform for fast and efficient e-discovery, digital forensics, incident response, data privacy, security, governance. So really taking all the risk around the growth of the data in organizations, and helping them understand where their data is, what it is, and then ultimately protect their organizations.
That's great. And I think not everyone knows that there's quite a concentration historically of e-discovery and legal tech firms here in the greater Portland area. I mean, there have been companies, like Zapproved and obviously Exterro, and now the two are combined. and and a number of smaller firms that kind of predate it. And a lot of companies here too that are focused on identity management and risk mitigation. So I feel like Exterro kind of in getting going here kind of built on this interesting foundation of both talent and previous companies that kind of came before it.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it's approved. It's all part of Exterro now. I think if you go back, one of the things that I loved about Exterro was they, like any good company, you start out focusing on something, right? And you found out
Mhm.
at the time, our founder, Bobby Valanchandran, was looking at it at the explosive growth of data caused by digital transformation. Everybody was talking about digital transformation for the past decade or so now. It seems like just yesterday that term was coined, but I know it's been around for a while. And so what they found was, hey, there's a lot of this data. Companies have all the data. It's the lifeline of the company. But with that became more and more a need to understand that data, but also some risk associated with that data. There was a growth of legal issues and needing to comply with growing regulations. And so the company has evolved from, hey, let's start with a footprint in legal hold where we are. That's where we started the company, doing legal holds for organizations, and have since evolved with, as trends happened, e-discovery requirements became legal requirements became significant. So we expanded into an e-discovery platform. And then you saw growing regulations happening like GDPR and the need for companies to comply with those regulations. So we got into the data privacy and security and governance. And then, with that comes more investigations and the digital forensics aspect. So we've been evolving the company over time, starting with our founding in Oregon and working with the company customers there, and all the way now where we really talk about it more as a holistic platform for data risk, because all those different components, they all start tying together where you know where data and risk come together, and we help companies try to mitigate that risk, prevent that risk, or lower their risk threshold.
And what are some of the verticals that you're most concentrated in terms of the types of customers that you're working with?
Yeah, the beauty is it doesn't apply to just one vertical, but the larger the organization, the more data they have, perhaps the more regulations that they are faced with, oversight. It can be, financial, manufacturing, all the different companies that are larger in size with a large uh, um, propensity for litigation. Those are the organizations that we most gravitate towards because they have a pretty significant need.
Mhm. And a lot of folks right now are talking about artificial intelligence, specifically generative AI, and sort of what that means for kind of changes to products and customer demands, et cetera. And what are some of the things that you're seeing in that space, and how has it impacted some of the work that you all are doing at Exterro?
Yeah, you can't go anywhere without somebody talking about AI, and it's interesting how it's evolved, and it's evolving quickly. It's probably evolving faster than almost any technology I've seen in the recent past. At Xterra, we've been involved for more than a decade in various forms in the evolution of AI, starting out with things like machine learning and how we apply that to our products. Obviously, generative AI is a hot topic people talk about with Chat GPT as an example. It's really evolving faster. We have Gen AI products integrated into the system. AI for me, people, talk about is it going to take over jobs and technologies? I view it as, especially in our space, as an efficiency driver, helping helping people be able to focus on the real issues or areas of focus that adds more value to the companies that they represent, and take some of that time consuming work and make it a little bit easier for them so they can be more effective and focus on the bigger, more strategic issues. So I look at it more as an efficiency driver as a general statement. Gen AI is where things are people are at today. There's actually a move to what's being you may have heard, or your audience may have heard about a distinct term called agents or agentic AI, and that is kind of the next step in where we're going. So we barely touched scratch the surface on Gen AI, and now we're into this agentic AI, and I use that as an example of you know Gen AI is really good at a lot of things, and it's very helpful to make you more effective and more efficient. I liken it to, if you're going to the doctor and you have a heart problem, you're having a problem with your heart, you can go to a your primary care physician or agentic AI, if you will, in the case of the parallel, and you'll get an answer, and it'll pull all the information for you. It may take you a little bit of time, but you'll ultimately get to the answer. Or you can go to an expert, a cardiologist, and get your answer based on a proven level of expertise. That's agentic AI. Where agentic AI is, you can have these smaller, more dedicated models that you can pull information, so you'll get them faster, more effective, more efficient, get to your answer more quickly. And we're heading in that direction as well from a technology standpoint. So it's been a fun watching Gen AI get all the come online, and now you're starting to see people continue to evolve to more an agentic AI, and that's where we're heading.
That's great. I mean, you can almost imagine that we have a number of member companies that are focused in education technology or healthcare and health tech, and many of them are using sort of AI agents as ways to essentially serve as a coach or a quote unquote coworker who's virtual and can help with certain tasks. And so, do you envision something similar when it comes to, let's say, compliance officers at larger companies as they're trying to navigate the regulatory landscape? You know, these types of solutions would essentially be their co-pilots, as it were, as they're navigating it.
Yeah, I mean, it all starts with data, and it all comes back to data, and that's what we're pulling from. So how do I get to that data, get to that answer more effectively, faster? And so that's where AI in general is going to help anybody. The agentic approach is one that says, I'm going to be very focused on this particular question or this type of information and be able to find that quickly and grab that information. So I become able to respond and learn quicker. It's not necessarily going to replace anybody. It's just going to make me, as a user, get to where I need to go a lot smoother, a lot faster, and a lot more effective, and quite frankly, more securely. So that's how I think companies are going to start using it. And in our space, particularly with the compliance officers or the chief legal officers, you know, getting to those answers, finding the information, being able to cite that information in a legal case, so I can be very clear about where I got it, so I don't get caught off guard. If I come up with an answer, I know exactly where it is. That's what we're trying to solve for, to make our end users much more productive, faster, more effectively.
Yep. And with with risk and compliance too comes sort of this focus around data, right? So a lot of the same issues that faced companies over the last 10 plus years around data governance and how to clean up and standardize their own data to ready it for ingestion into newer technologies that are emerging. It's the same with AI. And I'm wondering, are there areas where you're seeing across your customer base, is they're thinking about or actually adopting AI tools where there's opportunities for additional risk, where they need to be considerate of those areas? And are there certain opportunities that you're seeing from a product or service offering through Exterro where, as the technology proliferates, so too do the needs for additional sort of checklists when it comes to compliance and risk?
Yeah, great question. I'm gonna go into something that's not as sexy as AI, but something that I found in surprising me when I talk to customers, that is more the issue than pulling information, but is knowing where your data is. What I found was interesting is companies haven't really, because the data growth and sprawl has happened so quickly. Companies don't necessarily know where everything is, or how much of that personal information is in different places within an organization. And so one of the things that we've been developing and trying to get our customers to think about in advance of, hey, I'm going to use AI, is understanding and being able to catalog and map where all my information sources are and what all kind of data is out there. If I can do that, all of a sudden, my use of the AI and the technology and the different tools becomes more effective, because I know where everything is now, and I can be more comfortable with it. And quite frankly, even I can responsibly delete information that doesn't need to be there anymore, because it's no longer on legal hold, or I'm no longer a need from a compliance standpoint. So it's not as fun to talk about as AI is, but it's really interesting. And I was at legal conference earlier in the year, my first one there, and that was a topic that kind of got brushed over, but you could see the heads nodding when we were talking about knowing and being able to catalog and map where your data is, knowing that first. And then all of a sudden, all the tools become more effective, and I'm able to do things better, faster, more effectively.
Yep. Yep. So knowing and cataloging where your data is definitely an important sort of precursor to, any sort of adoption of AI. Are there other areas where putting your customer hat on, you're like, okay, these are the things that the ideal customer needs to be thinking about before they are ready for, this next step?
Well, I think about it from as a customer when I think about who we're talking to. What are they trying to do from a business standpoint is where I start. They're,
Mhm.
I've got to. Everybody will talk about, hey, how do I accurately discover where my risk is? What do I have? Because that's at the end of the day, what enterprises and what customers are doing is, how do I prevent myself from uh, security risks, from litigation risks, from compliance risks? How do I maintain compliance? And then how do I adapt to the increased amount of data from multiple remote applications and sources? Those are the kind of the business challenges that companies tend to be dealing with. And then you think about it, next step down is, what do I think about from an IT standpoint, and how do I support that? I've got to manage, all these different products separately. I've got to pull and decipher information from so many different sources. How do I support global requirements, and how do I connect to multiple applications? Those are all not necessarily Exterro specific things, but they're trying to do that. And I like to think about what I think about from a customer perspective, what's in it for me. If I can help somebody uh, identify that risk, maintain compliance, and adapt to that data, the increased amounts of data, I'm going to be pretty compelling. I also need to make sure that information is really accurate, especially from a legal standpoint. I don't want to be pulling or citing information in a case where, and have the risk be that the information isn't accurate, or that I have the risk of not having missing information. How do I do some, not only do I provide you information, but how do I give you actionable intelligence out of that data? And then obviously the big thing that they always try to do is, can you save me some costs along the way? Those are kind of the things that I think about from a customer perspective. In general, we obviously, believe that we can help customers address those issues in our specific space, as they help respond to growing digital risks that just is growing every day.
Mhm. And I'm wondering too, we have a lot of listeners who kind of span academia, workforce organizations, et cetera. And one of the bigger topics right now among educators is how to effectively prepare both existing professionals, but also the next generation of students coming up through the system for a world where AI is more prevalent. And I'm wondering, from the Exterro side of things, where are you seeing, either with your own team internally or more broadly, are you seeing some things change in terms of hiring requirements? And what do those look like?
I think the beauty of education is that they kind of jump into these trends fairly early on. So I think a lot of the folks that we're hiring and bringing on have some experience already, even already with AI. AI is part of their day to day, for example. So from a education standpoint, I feel like we're getting the types of people that are coming on board have a comfort level. An old folk like me, I'm still learning all this new stuff. These guys are AI is part of their day to day life, and so it's interesting that they're teaching me as much as I can teach them. I can teach about my, the history and lessons learned, because I've got some experience and seen a lot of these things play out before, but they certainly can help me with, how do I become more effective and more efficient? And I see that across all the different areas. I'm obviously in the marketing group, but the engineering, the comfort level, and how do I leverage AI in engineering? We've got a powerhouse engineering team based predominantly out of India, and the talent and the intelligence and the skill set that they have is second to none, and it's impressive to watch. So what it does for us is allows us to move even faster.
Mhm.
Our ability to adapt and change and iterate is impressive, but it's because of that the skill set we're hiring and the people that we're bringing on board have know what the tools are today, you know, and are able to apply it. I do think, one of the things that we want to do is, particularly from the legal world as it changes in particular, but is, how do we get our products into the schools' hands, in the educators' hands, so people are comfortable with our technology and other technology. Obviously, I want people to gravitate towards me, but I would like, the next generation of legal professionals and compliance professionals in ITs and CISOs is to have access to the different technologies earlier. And if we can help do that, we'll try and facilitate that as well.
Yeah, that's truly fantastic. I mean, I think a lot of times you've got some of these institutions that are moving at a slower pace. It's just how they've moved historically, right? And they don't pivot on a dime. But to the extent that there are corporate partners out there who can help kind of supplement or augment some of what folks are getting in a traditional classroom with, tools and boot camps and modules that they can kind of, spend their own time, learning about some of these newer approaches, newer technologies. I think that's kind of where we're headed, is a yes and approach. And I love what you said about sort of the curiosity component that the people that are coming through the doors at Exterro have a demonstrated ability and understanding to use AI because they're experimenting on their own. There's a lot of free tools out there and they're leveraging those. So I think that's a good kind of message for a lot of our listeners who are wondering, as parents or people who work in workforce or education, what should we be thinking about? What should we be teaching? Well, inspire curiosity with these tools. So thank you for that. And I wanted to, as we kind of shift again here in our conversation, as you look kind of 20,000 foot level, what are some of the things as we look down the road where you're seeing either additional demands placed on chief legal officers and compliance officers, given kind of the state of the world that we're in? Is it more about the velocity of information they have to deal with? Like, what are the big pain points that you're seeing right
Yeah,
now?
it's pretty consistent, Skip. I mean, it's really, it's velocity, but it's volume, and it's never going away. Like that volume continues to grow at exponential rates. So how do I get control of that? And when I think about it, the the more volume you have and the more data and the faster it comes, then the more tools you have and the more technologies you want to implement, which then starts to talk about integrations and how do I make all these things work together and where does my data go and all that different handoffs that have to happen, which I come back to full circle, which is all about opening your company, your organization, your team up to risk. That doesn't change. I don't see that changing anytime soon. In fact, it's only got to be more prevalent, which means I've got to look at things not just from the in the immediate, what is this going to do for me now, but what other risk does it open up for me when I start to, integrate this? And we've all seen all the talk about data breaches and the impact those have. One of the things I'd like to talk about is having a kind of a post breach mentality, pre breach. So
Yep.
assume for a second and maybe it's not even an assumption. Know that you are going to have a data breach at some point, right? That let's not go with the if it happens, but when it happens. If I think about that now, if I start thinking about that early on, I can be better prepared when it does happen, and how do I react to that? And certainly, those data breaches. Obviously, there's a lot of information that gets put at risk for the organization, but then it opens up legal issues, it opens up investigations, it opens up compliance. So you see all those things come back together, and that's how we started thinking about the company is this digital risk that's going to grow every day, and how do I address that? That actually doesn't change. I don't see that changing. I just think it becomes more prevalent, and the more data, the more challenges companies have. So that's where I tend to think about things longer term and higher level. Is it all comes back to one thing: your data and your risk factor.
Hmm. It's like that old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
That's right. Right.
Yep. Well, as we wrap, I wanted to see if there were some sort of final remarks or words of advice you'd like to leave our listeners with.
First of all, this is great. I really appreciate you having me on here. I would say to the folks listening is, embrace technology, embrace, certainly the AI conversation, no matter where you are, whatever organization you're in. I think AI is going to play a role, and don't be afraid of it. Figure out, how does it help me? How does it going to make me better, make me more efficient, and not be afraid of it? And then, when you think about it in terms of my implementation at work, again, don't be afraid of it. Think about it as an efficiency gain. Look at companies. What is their plan for AI? What is their strategy around making AI something that is information you can trust, information you can control? What's your security platform? How does my data is my data going into a public setting like a Gen AI, or is it going to be much more in a more focused smaller model, if you will, where that agentic approach we talked about comes into play because I don't share my data with anybody else. Those are the questions I would ask anybody, regardless of whether you're looking at Exterro. But how is my information being shared, and what's my tolerance, and what's the companies that I'm working with how do they think about it from a security standpoint? I think AI is here to stay, but I think you can also ask yourself some questions to keep yourself feeling like my data is not at risk, my company's not at risk, and my reputation is.
Well, John, thank you for taking some time out of your busy schedule to join us. Appreciate you and your willingness to share some insight with us in this fast moving space that you all are in at Exterro. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.